Good afternoon, dear Ambassador, Director, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome everybody to today here at the House of Europe, as we usually say, the premises of the European Commission in Spain, for this very interesting event co-organized by the Belgian Embassy and Elcano. Dear Ambassador, dear Gert, welcome again. The Belgian Presidency of the Council of the EU is coming to an end. And we can already say that it is, and it has been, a very fruitful and successful presidency. But we can also say that your embassy has been extraordinarily active with the events you have organized throughout these months, and you have launched during this period very, very interesting discussions. Today you bring to this House a very pertinent discussion, and in particularly a relevant moment just before the new political cycle in the EU takes off. And you will discuss on two very relevant elements. First, enlargement, and second, reforms. Both aspects are definitely linked, and I hope your discussions can shed light on how the Union will be for the next 5 years and for the long time that we have ahead in the construction of the Union. Thank you very much, and I hope you all the best for the discussions today in this event. Thank you.
¿Mejor así? Vale. Muy bien. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Welcome to this roundtable on the future of Europe, defining a deepened and widened Europe. We are happy, together with the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to partner with the Royal Institute Elcano and the Royal Institute for International Relations, EGMO, in organizing this event. This is, as Lucas has just said, the last event in the framework of the Belgian Presidency of the European Union here in Madrid, before we hand over in 2 weeks' time to Hungary. The real work, of course, has been done and is still being done by our colleagues in Brussels, under the slogan, protect, strengthen and prepare. We were lucky to be able to build on the very successful Spanish presidency just before us. Together, we managed to finalize a vast amount of legislative files in important fields such as migration, the multi-annual financial framework, economic governance, Ukraine package, artificial intelligence, and many others. From the 1st of July of 2023 until the end of April of this year, when the European Parliament was dissolved, this was in fact, if I might say it this way, one long, successful presidency, Spanish and Belgian ones. As of that date, the focus of our presidency has shifted to the future, with two main items on the agenda. First, the strategic agenda, setting the priorities for the next legislative cycle. And second, the topic of today's roundtable, the future of Europe. Both will be high on the agenda of next week's European Council. We will have two panels this afternoon. The first, moderated by Jean-Louis de Brouwer from EGMO, will deal with enlargement, 20 years after the EU's biggest enlargement to date, adding 10 countries and 75 million citizens to our union. What can we learn from that experience, and what does it mean for the next expansion? The second panel, chaired by Raquel García Llorente from Elcano, will look at internal reform, a process that will run in parallel to enlargement. Indeed, as a union, we'll have to do our own homework to prepare for enlargement. But even without enlargement, we would have to look at ways to improve our capacity to act and to adapt to a changing world. In short, to keep the Union fit for purpose. Unfortunately, Secretary of State San Pedro cannot be with us this afternoon. He is accompanying, if I understand well, Prime Minister Sanchez to the informal meeting of heads of state and government today in Brussels. In his place, Secretary General for the European Union, Maria Lledó, will join our Director General for European Affairs, Bernard Quintin, to conclude proceedings later today. Let me end by thanking Elcano and Egmont for organizing this timely roundtable, our panel members for giving us what will surely be a high-quality debate, you, our public, for being here with us, and a final thanks to the representation of the European Commission in Madrid for hosting us. I wish you all an interesting and, I hope, thought-provoking seminar. I now give the floor to Charles Powell, Director of the Royal Institute Elcano.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's wonderful to see you all here today on this rather sultry Madrid summer's afternoon, or almost evening. But I think the topic is well worth it, and that's why you've all very kindly agreed to join us. Let me start by thanking the Commission Office, Lucas in particular, for hosting this event. I was telling him earlier, this is one of my favorite venues in Madrid. We've organized so many events here that I could almost get emotional about being here, but I won't, don't worry. I also want to thank the Belgian Embassy, Gert in particular, for your support throughout your time here. Gert will sadly be leaving us in August. All good things must come to an end, as you all know, and he has done a sterling, outstanding job as the Belgian ambassador here in Spain. So congratulations for a job well done, and thank you so much for your support. My thanks to Egmont as well, the Royal Institute, our sister Royal Institute in Brussels. We have a small office in Brussels, as some of you may know, on the Rue du Trône, and I very much hope that in years to come, Egmont and Elcano will find a way of organizing lots of events such as this and writing joint papers and doing joint research, possibly with the help of our friends at TEPSA, the Trans-European Policy Studies Association, to which both of our institutes have belonged for many years. And at Elcano, let me thank Ignacio Molina and Raquel Garcia, and of course, all of the speakers, particularly those who have come from further afield. This is an extremely timely event for several reasons. We've just heard the Spanish Prime Minister is attending a dinner tonight, and hopefully in the course of this dinner, a bit of light will be shed on the top jobs for the institutional cycle that is now starting. And of course, the European election results are now finally in. It'll be interesting to hear what our speakers have to say about the impact of the election on both of the topics that we will be looking at, enlargement and deepening. It's difficult really to sum up what's happened, and the paradox is that the two prevailing interpretations have both turned out to be right. On the one hand, the centre did hold, thank God, but at the same time we did see an alarming increase in support for certain radical far-right parties, particularly in some of the larger member states. So on the whole, the result was positive, but there is, I think, some room for concern as well. And today, the other reason why this is so timely is because we are looking at both enlargement and deepening. This is one of the oldest debates, I think, in European integration studies. Does enlargement always accompany deepening? What is the sequence? Do reforms have to take place before one can enlarge the EU? Historically, I think we could say that both processes have gone hand in hand. What I think is pretty certain is that in the next institutional cycle, we will be facing both challenges, and hopefully the European integration project will emerge stronger as a result. So without further ado, can I call our speakers to come to the table? Thank you all very much for being here again, and I hope you enjoy the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you both to you, Charles, and to the Ambassador Cox for your kind works, kind introductory works, and also thanks a lot to the European Commission, my former employer, for hosting us in these premises tonight. Well, there are many ways to approach the debate and the issue of enlargement. You've already raised one question, Charles, in your introduction. And I'm sure that both during this panel and during the next one, our guests will wish to share their views about that. We still have to remember that 10 years ago, when Jean-Claude Juncker took over the chairmanship of the Commission, there was question of an enlargement fatigue at the time. So we are clearly in a different setup nowadays. But the question is how long this will last, and how should our political leaders, who indeed are meeting to hopefully take important decisions tonight, build on the existing momentum. The first panel is indeed dedicated to the enlargement as such, widening, although, and you said it again, I mean, the distinction between widening and deepening is a little bit artificial, and I'm sure that there will be spillover between these two sessions tonight. And by the way, this is something which is quite topical, quite a topical debate in Belgium, what should come first and how should the two be connected. What we would like to do tonight, and we is a collective we, and I'm very privileged to be able to moderate this panel, is to, have a look at the enlargement from three different angles. The first speaker will be Alexandra Palkova. Alexandra is an old friend of ours, both Elcano and Egmont, also a distinguished member of TEPSA. And Alexandra is a Latvian. So, she is one of the citizens of one of these big bang enlargement member states. So those who have celebrated the 20th anniversary of their EU membership and the 25th anniversary of NATO membership, if my memory is correct.
20, also 20.
Yes, okay, also 20 of NATO at the same time. In many of these member states, and we've been associated with that, there have been exercises going on, looking backwards, looking forwards. Okay, what kind of benefit did we take from enlargement? What impact did enlargement have on the economy, on the social fabric, on the institutions of our countries, and how do we see ourselves today? There is a very unfortunate tendency in Brussels to still refer to the 2004 enlargement member states as new member states, as if there were still new and old member states. But my answer to that is a very personal one. 25 years ago, we were lucky enough to buy a little house in the countryside of Belgium, in a remote corner of the country. And still 20 years after, we are still labeled as les nouveaux voisins, the new neighbors. So, okay, you have to be patient. At a certain point in time, the new will be dropped. So, Alexandra, you come in first. In retrospect, and be very candid about, the pros and the cons of the enlargement. How do you assess the situation of Latvia today? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to be here. And you raised so many questions already. I'm not sure to which actually to focus and start with. Indeed, I come from the Baltic. My country is Latvia, but today, because I'm certain that I'm the only Baltic representative in the audience, I will talk more often to the Baltic as a general, three countries, not only in the Latvia, because we do share a similar way. And I would like to start with a bit different path. And that if we try to look in the retrospective of the 20 years of the enlargement, it's important to realize that we can divide the process in three stages. One of them for us, for the Baltics, was the first stage, which was called going inside into EU as far as we can. We were trying to integrate, and we were active learners, let's call it this way. The reason behind that is that you have to understand, in 2004, we get independent in 1991. In 2004, we sent, of course, the request to get enlarged in the EU, and in 2004 we enlarged. But that meant that only then the actual work began. So for us, first 5 years till the economic crisis was the active learner stage. When we were learning, we were trying to condemn everything what was coming from the Brussels. And you have to clearly draw the line, and this is when later on I assume that we will of course talk about Ukraine, that this is something what is in that region, which is the Russia on our geopolitical neighborhood. For us, EU as well as the NATO was the crucial, essential living as a factor of the actual existing, not only the standard of the others, as you can see that some countries can enlarge within the EU because it's economically beneficial. For us, economical side, of course, was also crucial, but the first one was absolutely geopolitical logic, geopolitical secure logic being enlarged within the EU. And therefore, we can say that the first 5 years of the enlargement for us was the active learner stage. Then in 2008 and after the economic crisis, we started to drive so-called self-awareness and realization that actually we can have our own viewpoints on the certain EU policies. We had to establish our own views on the common defense policy, what we actually assess or not. And we started to realize that we don't have to agree with Brussels on everything, because in the initial years we tend to agree on everything because we were so scared that we will be excluded from the club that we had to agree and retake all the initiatives. Of course, please take it a bit critically, but on a larger scale, it was the views. And here, side notes, I would like to talk about later on the society case, because society also for us played a crucial role. We never, ever, for the 20 years, had Eurosceptics in our politics, simply because, first of all, we had our neighbor Russia. They're present in the country. It's I'm talking now only about the Latvia. Case of the Estonia would be different, but. The reason behind that was that the society and the rapid transformation within the EU happened so quick that the society never realized, and they still only started to realize now what actually happened. Because when we started to enlarge in the EU, we started to retook all initiatives so quickly on a governmental and political level that the society never has been asked, what do you think on that issue, or what do you think about the climate change? What do you think about the common defense policy? And it created a bigger debate now, which, as a lesson learned, I think we have to also think about the candidate status countries who are enlarging right now, that within the rapid integration, we lose the sense of explaining enlargement process to the societies. Because I do see that we have three categories of the society. Those who were part of the enlargement process, which took initial stage in 2004. Those who actually didn't understand really, but they voted for the EU in referendum, those voted, of course, supportively. But then when the actual process took place, they just simply framed the EU as an additional bureaucratic entity. And still the narrative in the society is that this is a bureaucratic entity somewhere there in Belgium, somewhere there in Brussels. And they don't even differentiate, unfortunately, by the institutions. For them, EU is all together. There is no such a thing as European Commission, European Parliament, unfortunately. But this is the belief of the older society that indeed this is how we see that. So to come back to the third step and the third stage, I think, on the 20 years reflection, I think that then starting from 2014, and this is where I can reflect not only on the Latvia, but also on the Baltic states and overall for those who enlarged in 2004, the 2014 was year when we finally started to set the ground confidently. For us, it was a year 2015 of the first presidency, right? The majority of the countries who enlarged in 2004 held already the second presidency, or will held, example of the next presidency of Hungary. But for us, it was the first presidency when we actually realized that it's a time when we can start play confidently and set our own agenda. We did with the Central Asia. We absolutely bridged the EU with the Central Asia countries, because our history within the Soviet Union, unfortunately or fortunately, played a different path that it helped us to actually lead the EU to the Central Asia. But at the same time, what we realized back in our presidency was that this is the momentum when we can start talking as a new member state, because we constantly face the criticism being called new, that you are not yet there to actually set your own agenda. It was example actually, sorry for running further, but it was example also with the war in Ukraine. Although we were there, we were critically talking about that. Being faced this criticism of new member states within the EU, it backfired in different areas, including that when we try to set our agenda, usually still the Baltics, it's not there. Right now, because of geopolitical strategic environment, it's changed. But I still think that we have to address the debate of the new and old member states. And as you said, example of your neighbors, maybe we have to wait until our presidency, second presidency. Then time-wise, it will be 25 years. So maybe then we will be called an actual member of the EU. To add here, I think that one of the absolute benefits of the enlargement for us was, of course, economical-wise. We grew and we integrated within the EU, but we secured our ground to be called, because again, also more broadly to explain the logic, for us it was the path that we want to be associated not as a country in the East, not as a country, as a post-Soviet Union country. We wanted to be called the Nordic countries, the countries in the Europe. Yes, we are the most eastest and broader line with the Russia country, but at the same time, it was strategically important for us to see the difference. And therefore, I think that the enlargement, this brought more geostrategic logic for us, of course, economically wise as well, but it was more political side which played the role. But at the same time, we also faced a lot of challenges, including in the economics, politics. But I think that the most biggest issues we still are face in the society, with the society who actually, unfortunately, but cannot understand the logic of the EU, despite the fact that they are absolutely pro-European, so they support the EU, but there is no understanding of that. It is changing narrative, because right now we have two already generations which were born after Latvia became part of the EU. So this narrative is changing in the society, the new generation who enjoys Erasmus programs, ability to travel, they do realize the difference. And this is the reason why, to look, Charles, you said about European elections, but this is the reason why we actually finally had higher turnout as it was in 2019, because the new generation is growing and they understand the logic of actually being called EU citizens and being responsible for the European Parliament. I will stop here because there is also more to cover, but...
Well, we'll come back. We'll come back, definitely. I mean, listening to you, you reminded me something that one of my friends coming from the new member states once told me. You have to bear in mind that for some member states, modern history began in 1945. For others, it began in 1989. And that's a fundamental difference. And we have not understood that yet, and it's now coming back with a revenge. But okay, I would like maybe to turn to Fanny Karanfilova. I mean, we are very privileged to have you here, Fanny, today, because actually you are not only an observer as a think tanker, but you are also in your function as an advisor to the government of Macedonia, Northern Macedonia, deeply involved in the process. When looking at the Commission enlargement package of last year, clearly North Macedonia and Montenegro are the two front runners. I mean, they are the two scoring the best on all possible criteria. And yet, North Macedonia has been in the waiting room for how many time?
Since when we are counting? Since candidate status 2005, meaning 20, almost 20
Almost 20 years.
Since the candidate, since the process started, 25.
Microphone. You are to push it. Okay, okay. No, we all forget that. So now that was exactly what we would like to, we would appreciate you to elaborate upon. What does it make to have been in the waiting room, to having been for the waiting room for 20 years, being seen as the front runner and still waiting?
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would like to thank the Royal Instituto Elcano and the Real Instituto Government and the Belgian Embassy in Spain for inviting me to be with you here today. The debate is rather challenging, but it's at the same time a very current, but at the same time, as you said, a traditional one. Our first panel, and what I have to focus on, is the enlargement for the countries which are in the process yet. I will speak as I've been with the process as it started, so since 2000, I would say. But biggest portion of this 24 years of experience, 25, I would say, was on the side of the civil society. I've been part of the Open Society Foundation for more than 23 years. I've been executive director there just until the beginning of 2023, since when I started being part of as an external special advisor to the Vice Prime Minister for European Integration, which position I'm holding at the moment. So I hope I won't be too much critical. I would speak my mind, and I would speak how do I view the process, speaking from my experience and perspective. But I must say I'm one of the EU fields which are becoming a rare species currently in the region, I would say in North Macedonia as well, unfortunately. So what a prolonged EU accession has brought to the region, I'll speak through the lenses. I will speak for the whole region, but will speak merely through the lenses of the experience of North Macedonia. So what it has brought and where we are now. We've said that the stabilization association process and the SA agreements have been signed 20 plus years ago. The countries, traditionally countries in the region, once they've been governed by progressive left options, have been more committed to the process, speaking generally. The Western Balkan countries, all of them have gone through the process with different speed, different dynamic, entering the processes and phases in different time of these two decades. Macedonia is front runner not only now. Macedonia was the first country to sign the SA agreement in 2001, so it was actually even before Croatia at that time, I would say. There have been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of promises, a lot of successes, a lot of setbacks, different experiences. 2 decades is not a short period of time. But unfortunately, the wished target, full-fledged membership, was not achieved. And if we speak what were the reasons, there are many reasons for sure. I will speak about some of them later, but I would say as the most bold one, what was mostly due to which we are where we are, is that the genuine political will was lacking on both sides. On the sides of the countries that are part of the accession process, of the integration process, but also on the side of the EU. Or, to put it more realistically maybe, the genuine political will was not at the same time for the both sides. We somehow crossed past each other in terms of will and commitment. The main characteristic of the EU accession being the transformative power of the society and bringing changes to the institution has been fading, I would say, in the perception of the citizens, but also in among the people who work on this issue. The predictability of the process and the tangible results and outcomes were oftentimes blurred or were not communicated well. We are coming to the communication for which Alexandra was talking before. So the process and the challenges are not familiar to the general public. The meritocracy on the side of EU, I would say, was inconsistent. Bilateral disputes, unfortunately, were the ones who hindered the progress, oftentimes. And it's, in the case of Macedonia, I would say for 2 times now. First, it was with Greece, which kept us 17 years aside from opening the accession talks. And now with Bulgaria. And of course, we have, the government has taken the courage and leadership and accepted the French proposal, although being pretty much unpopular among the public, and that's one of the, I would say, reasons for such an election results on our recent elections in May, among other things. But the opposition and the major public are not in support, so we haven't voted for the constitutional amendment, so we cannot still progress in the second stage of opening the accession talks. And this comes as a boomerang in terms of what? Rising nationalism, rising populism, rising xenophobia, I would say, rising Euroscepticism, rising pro-Russian sentiments in North Macedonia, but in the region in general, I would say. I was stuck with one of the recent results of the poll did by the Republican Institute, saying, for example, that Serbia, 34% of the population in Serbia was for Russia as an option, not EU. The support for EU was quite less. So, unfortunately, the prolonged EU accession or EU integration of the region has left space for interference from external forces which promote something else than Euro-Atlantic integration. Where are we now? We have all the 6 Western Balkan countries, including, speaking 6, including Kosovo for sure, which 5 of them are candidate countries. 2 of them are conducting accession talks, Serbia and Montenegro, Montenegro being the front runner. North Macedonia and Albania have opened the first stage of the accession talks, and the others are to follow. Where we are in terms of enlargement policy, in addition, we have 3 countries from the Eastern Partnership, which reasonably, after the breakout of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, become, as analysts wish to say, the geopolitical part of the enlargement, are here at the table. We have European Union that has just finished the European elections. The results that Mr. Powell stated, I completely agree with this. These 2 narratives seem to be 2 completely correct, reaffirming the central left-right stability, but also increased rise on the radical side to the far right, which concerning. But after such an elections, you also just mentioned that tonight there is a starting talk of the informal planning for the new institutional infrastructure of the European Union for the next 5 years. Me coming from North Macedonia, Western Balkans, I'm convinced, or I would like to see that the policy of the European Union in regards to enlargement will remain as it is, or the enlargement will remain highly on the agenda. We will see how it would look like with a new strategy agenda for the next 5 years, how it is positioned. So EU is in the process of putting the new leadership that is going to guide the Union for the future after having had 5 years, I would say, of a protracted multi-dimensional crisis, COVID, energy crisis, post-truth crisis, war in Europe on its borders with Ukraine, etc., etc. So I believe that it has been an ongoing process, but I think that now European Union needs it most is the reform of the institutions and reform of the policies that are going to reflect the current reality. There are proposals coming from the Franco-German working group on how to reshape, resize the policy making in the Union and the decision making. There are lots of decisions to be taken, I think, on the side of how we are going to reallocate the funding to accomplish the economic convergence within the Union, but especially with the countries that are to be approaching and being part. So, but I would say, nevertheless, all these challenges, countries in the Western Balkans, as my country, Macedonia, is facing a new challenge. We will have, it's a question of days, a new government put in place, a right-wing government that has won the elections on the wave of nationalism and on the negotiating French proposal for the negotiation framework. I hope they will gather courage and reason to keep the pace of the EU accession process. We'll see. So the point is the governments in the region change their commitment and views to the accession. Again, change. Again, we are somehow cross-passing the commitments at which I spoke at the beginning. But I still think that what was the proposal by President of the Council, Charles Michel, launched on the Bled Strategic Summit last August, it's a reasonable one, that 2030 is a reasonable date till which both the European Union and the countries in the region could do their homework and reforms, so that there will be a new enlargement. That's what I would like to see, that's what I hope for, and that's what we would say would give the push and impetus to the new institutional setup in the Union to work for. It will need a lot of efforts, a lot of commitment, a lot of solidarity and creativity to do it. But I would say, and this is the last for my first intervention, Western Balkans inevitably needs political integration into the Union. The new growth plan is fantastic. It is operationalization of the staged-in accession, phased-in accession, but it's merely focused on acceding the European single market. Yes, it's important, it is needed. The economic development and convergence is one of the top priorities, but I would say Western Balkans needs political integration in the Union, meaning that we should do the growth plan things, but I hope we will more do accession negotiations and concluding chapters compared to the growth plan. So that will be my last message. Thank you very much.
Well, indeed, you anticipated a lot of things that I wanted to raise earlier, amongst other things, because I think that it is unfortunately a little bit overseen, the impact on these two new financial instruments, the growth plan and the Ukraine facility, as a lever to accelerate, at least in the economic dimension, the convergence of economies and therefore prepare the enlargement. Both are inspired by Next Generation EU. There are targets, but that maybe if you have time, we'll come back on that. Yeah. We'll park the institutional issue because that's going to be Raquel who is going to deal with that during the panel that she will moderate afterwards. Now I would turn to Professor Ferrero. I could ask you to do the same exercise. After all, Spain was also part of an enlargement process at the time. Spain is not actually labeled as a new member state anymore, but I will spare you these details, spare you this exercise. As a professor of political sciences, I would like to hear your views about the following. At a time that the EU is more than often seen as irrelevant in many areas of external relation, usually the common wisdom is to say, but the one and only effective tool of the EU external policy is enlargement. And of course, this resonates at the time, and you said it, Alexandra, again, the geopolitical argument is used to, reinitiate the enlargement process. Do you really see that as an efficient external relation tool? I mean, does that enhance the international actorness of the EU enlargement? Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I wanted to thank the Real Instituto Elcano, Ignacio Molina, Charles, Belgian Embassy, and Egmont. Thank you for your question. I would say that you're asking me how effective had been the conditionality principle in order to maintain and transform the countries who were getting into the European Union. So I would say that it depends how you measure that. Because if we put it in a way as, for instance, to the rule of law issues and democratic institutionalization of some of the European countries that get into the European Union in 2004, clearly failed. I mean, there's a lot of academic literature who were talking about Europeanization of Hungary, Poland, and other countries, and in some bits they were, the first of the class in 2004, and then we've seen that because of the leadership they got and how the transition, the ideological transition they made into their political systems, they just failed. The no existence of internal sanctions towards the democratic backsliding and rule of law backsliding, we were putting into force later as it was to 2020. And also because of linking with the COVID-19 measures that have been taking place at that time. So from that point of view, on the rule of law and democracy, we have to wait a little bit to see if it's possible to stabilize and maintain democracy and on liberal democracy on those terms. But at the same time, we have these tendencies inside the European Union, and you also wanted to hear something on the last European elections. So we have some of these political forces that are going through betting for illiberal democracy, winning in some parts of the European Union and most of the parts on Eastern European countries, not just on Eastern European countries, because we've seen what's happening in the main axis of the European integration in Paris and Berlin, and how these nationalist extreme right parties are rising, in the case of France being the first political force there, and in the case of Germany being the second political force there. So the geopolitical inside of the European Union has moved towards east, and I would say also towards south, being Rome and Warsaw one of the main axes right now. And just today I was just seeing how Orban was having meetings with Meloni and with Morawiecki in Brussels. So they are trying to arrange a kind of alliance, preparing the dinner tonight maybe, and something else. So I would say that we have to face also as well. And there have been a couple of publications recently on how the results of the European Union elections can affect the enlargement. And I would say that it depends on geography more than ideology. I mean, if we focus on the extreme right, let's put it in the Western European countries, they were probably more against enlargement, but if we focus on Eastern neighbors, they are betting more for getting integration into the single market. They want to expand the single market towards them, but the conditionality addressed to the rule of law may be lower than it used to be. And I think that's a risk that we have to face at that point. So if we want to build up a geopolitical Europe, we have this dilemma: how to build a geopolitical Europe without, losing standards on rule of law and liberal democracy, since we also have problems in our own democracy. So maybe what's going on in North Macedonia with these nationalistic forces, they can have alliances inside the European Union, of course, and they do. And they might, improve and speed up the negotiations because they are interested on that. But that doesn't mean that we are going to have a European Union as it used to be, So I think one of the issues we have to pay attention at is which kind of European Union we want. So what kind of artifact we are going to build after this huge crisis, this poly-crisis issue that we're facing over the last years with the pandemic and then the wars on the borders in the south and in the east. So which kind of values are going to rule Europe? That's one of my questions. I don't have an answer for that. We should wait for the new open up of the new political cycle in the European Union, how the center-right is going to act, maintaining the center with liberals and social democrats, or if they're going to, have some bargaining with the far right, even though they assume that some of those righties are assumable for for governing in some dossiers. But I found it very, very difficult to assume for Democrats in general to negotiate with parties as Fratelli d'Italia or even PiS in Poland or Fidesz in Hungary. And I just let me quote something that the EU mentioned, the European Commission mentioned on what enlargement would be. And it's basically, they said, the geostrategic investment in a strong, stable and united Europe should be based on common values. The thing here is how to define those common values. What is the meaning of Europe right now? What is the meaning of Europeanization right now? It's just getting into the single market and have a unified position towards Russia? It's just that, or is something else? And I guess that, the integration, the European integration process has been much more, addresses also to the values based on the Article 2 of the treaties, and on respect of minorities, respect for rule of law, and respect for liberal democracy.
Well, thanks a lot for this overview. And this brings us, of course, well, by the way, I mean, this is for the time being a conversation between the members of the panels, but I will soon turn to the audience, and please prepare your questions and comments, by the way. So this brings us back to the geopolitical dimension. Two comments before turning to this. When we elaborate on the outcome of the European election, one has to bear in mind that the previous parliament has adapted its rule of procedure in a way that it reinforces its action capacity and influence on the other institutions. So, I mean, that is a possibility which will exist for the new assembly, and that could or not be used by its member and the majorities inside the European Parliament. Second thing, what strikes me is that when we are referring to, I would say, kind of a club or network of illiberal, no one yet mentions the Netherlands. Yet. Not yet. By the way, a founding member state. So it can also reach founding member states. They are not immune for that, France neither. But the Netherlands are certainly more advanced in that process. The geopolitical dimension. I would turn first back to you, Fanny. In two different circumstances. Recently, we heard a representative at ministerial level of the incoming Hungarian presidency clearly stating that they were considering that Ukraine was not ready for enlargement, that offering enlargement to Ukraine was not the right thing to do, and that therefore they would focus during their term to the group of Western Balkan countries. Okay, there might be many reasons for that, we all know, but that's at least the formal statement of the incoming presidency. So there is there indeed the risk of a kind of a beauty contest between two clubs. Hence my question to you first, but then I will turn to you, Alexandra, because of course, because of their geographical position, the Baltic countries are front and center when this comes to this debate. Is the opening of accession negotiation with Ukraine and Moldova. And by the way, it's another success of the Belgian presidency because the negotiation platform has been adopted and the IGC will begin next week in Luxembourg, if my memory is correct. I mean, is this profitable to the whole enlargement process, or do you see there a risk or a danger?
Look, the enlargement process, the accession process had always had its political leg and its technical leg. And if we speak about political part of the enlargement, this is inevitable. Facing war in Europe on its borders, one of the strongest instruments the European Union has is to offer a fast-track procedure to Ukraine and to two neighboring countries that are also affected by the war, kind of a stability, assurance, whatever you want, belonging, point of belonging, in order not to lose a larger part of the continent on the other side. So politically speaking, I completely understand, I support, and it should happen. The technical part of the accession in terms of meritocracy, processes, what's first, what's second, how do we build credibility of the process, how is European Union going to explain to the governments and people in Western Balkans why they are there for 20 years plus, and now how come that three countries that have been part of the Eastern Partnership had association agreements with EU, all of a sudden, within a year, got opening of accession talks? It's a matter of virtue of the European Union and communication in the countries, speaking of the Western Balkans, I would say, but also in the three countries that will be part of the process, to explain where we are and how and why we should go further on. I think you mentioned the statement of the incoming Hungarian presidency official. I hope we understand completely why this statement is why it is as it is. And that's what I've been talking in my first part. If we leave a blank space, not having the full commitment of the European Union in both regions now, speaking of the Western Balkans especially, we leave blank space for forces just like Orban and his allies from across the eastern borders. We have that experience and influence in North Macedonia. We have our former Prime Minister being guest of Mr. Orban for 7 years now. We have announced a support, state funding support grant, 1 billion. That's what the incoming Prime Minister said from an EU country coming to North Macedonia. Thinking twice, 3 times, I don't know, my assumption goes to Hungary. So my point was, I hope the second part of Western, they will stick within the presidency of the Western Balkan enlargement is true and valid. I doubt that both parts of the statement are somehow concerning to me if I read enter the text.
Alexandra, you know, but I would ask to complement my question by another one. Fanny referred to, in her previous intervention, the so-called stage accession process. Latvia, as the other beneficiaries of the Big Bang enlargement, did not enter into such a process. I mean, you got the full package of membership immediately. Do you see some value into that kind of stage accession process? Because it is obvious that whatever the final choice will be, I doubt that we're going to have anytime soon a Big Bang enlargement. I mean, it's going to be more a kind of a regatta scenario. But part of the debate is about stage accession. I know that for some of the candidate countries, they don't like that at all, because I mean, they see that as another way to keep them outside, at least waiting at the door. So that would be my second question to you. First, the geopolitical dimension and the offer made to Ukraine. Do you see that as an asset for the enlargement process or as a potential other obstacle? And what if we would, should we embark into this kind of stage accession offer?
I think absolutely two critical and important questions to address. But look, I will be honest as possible. But for instance, when we talked even back in 2004 and before 2004, for us, even in the Baltics, the question was, would we succeed to actually approve and start negotiations? Because back in that time, we just simply become independent and we didn't have war in our territory. But already then, we didn't have full support from the member states and full support of the European institutions to get accessed within the EU. And this is not the real scenario when you have a country within on his territory with the war. So of course, what was said about the fast track and integration, I want to actually just simply say that I am absolutely a believer in the European Union and in what the European Commission is doing. Therefore, I think that it is as fast as it is possible with the given circumstances which we have. So we cannot expect even more to what the European Commission is currently doing. Even if you look on the practicalities, given the pace and speed, how fast the countries get the candidate status, and Ukraine, how fast it was approved, it was already fast-tracked. As much as it have been possible. To expect more, it's simply naivety, if I can say that way, because it's already in a way as it was. And given that the European Commission also revised its methodology in the accession negotiations and the enlargement methodology, we see right now the new pace for the fundamentals clusters, that this is a key core priority that for the countries which will enlarge, and that there has been a lot of done, and there will be a lot of to be due. But to answer your question on the geopolitical stance, again, it's a tricky question, and I think it's more philosophical question. Because for the countries in the East, of course, given the sentiment of the realization that we sense similarity with the Ukraine, they will support accession negotiations and the enlargement process. But for the countries on the other side, the sensitivity of having a country within which country you have a war, it's an absolutely geostrategically difficult. And this is what you can see not only within the enlargement process within the EU, but also simply by the practicalities of the investments and help which is provided as an aid. The recent example of the sanctions package which was not approved. You can see different examples on that. So I can't comment on the white or gray in this question, but white on black, there is absolutely a gray area to step in. On the other note regarding the accession integration, I think it's something what is absolutely beneficial within the latest methodology of the enlargement, because as long as the country, for instance, let's talk about Ukraine and Montenegro and also Moldova, by the way, the accession integration is absolutely beneficial steps for the countries, because as soon as the country meets the criteria, which is on the constant screening process from the European Commission within the negotiation framework, but also on the screening processes itself, as soon as the country meets the criteria, which is constantly monitored, the country gets access to the first benefits of being in the EU. And this is the alternative of the fast track, absolute alternative. And that's why when we talked about the dynamism, I think that the current dynamism of the enlargement is as much as we could expect from the European Commission and from the member states. We cannot, unfortunately, squeeze even more. and sorry for maybe stating in this way, but we do realize, and in the beginning of the introduction, we talked about the enlargement fatigue. Absolutely. After the Big Bang enlargement, there was a huge wave of the enlargement fatigue within the countries, because we have faced the structural funds division. We have seen that the countries couldn't manage. Again, coming back for what was said about the Hungary and fundamentals and the rule of law problem, that all created an absolute gap within the belief of the enlargement. So, of course, after the war in Ukraine, and there was a new wave of support for the enlargement, but we have to be realistic and expect that the fatigue will start to grow. And this is the question mark for the Commission and for the Member States to keep that in the same path. Example of the Moldova being absolutely pro-European, but there is actual elections coming. How we can support that country, how we can provide the support as far as we can, that we ensure that the citizens actually still believe, and it's not only Moldova, but I think the more proper example will be actually Georgia. Absolutely Georgia, that we have a country there is a society who is absolutely pro-European, who believes in the EU, but unfortunately, we come back to what you said, geostrategical complicances, where it's simply a situation where maybe we would like to give more, but there is a strategic logic where we cannot do that. Mm-hmm. Again, this is a realism in a true spectrum. And so maybe comment on the overall that I think that in the end, right now, within the mandates also which will be created, I am absolutely sure that given the old communication, what has been done from the European Commission side, from the Council, the enlargement will be there for sure, and it will be a geostrategic, it will be based on the fundamentals, it will be, and again, we come back to fundamentals, which is a core of the enlargement, and these fundamentals are the ones who actually establish the speed of the negotiation. And this is where I think that the revised methodology from the European Commission side on the enlargement plays a crucial role, that they actually take absolutely really narrowed view on how the processes are being monitored, and they can put if the country is backsliding, they can put the clock. So it's important.
Again, I will now turn for a last intervention before I turn to the audience to you, Professor Ferrero. But what you just said about the geopolitical and the fundamentals resonates with your first intervention, Professor, when you said, okay, there's a lot about the economic criteria of enlargement, but very little about the political and rule of law criteria. I read recently a paper from Richard Youngs about that, proposing to revisit the Copenhagen criteria and implement an accession preparation procedure that would reinforce the civil society organization in the acceding countries in view of protecting them against any risk of illiberalism, if I can say so, in the process of accession. But that's a bit of something that we might discuss during the second panel. I still would like to ask you a question which I'm struggling with. Okay, if we take for granted that, okay, geopolitical is the word. Okay, there is a geopolitical necessity for the time being. But if at the same time we hear a series of member states, including Belgium, insisting on a merits-based approach, how do you reconcile both? Because geopolitical means speed, merits-based means time. So, do you have any miracle trick?
No, no. Then at the end, no. Yeah, that's the big dilemma what we have here. Because we have to have a decision on prioritizing geopolitical criteria over the merit-based criteria. I don't know if they're irreconcilable. I mean, I think we have to find a way to compound both of them. We have to think, I was thinking while my colleagues were talking that, you know, over the years, when we were dealing with enlargement, we were prioritizing from Europe stability and security over democratic security, right? We were just putting, you know, all the efforts on stabilize the region in the Balkans. Stabiliocracies were implemented. The European Union did nothing because they were prioritizing stability and security, not democracy. And now we want to do exactly the same, but with, you know, enlargement. First was with, you know, the waiting room for the Western Balkans, and now they wanted to put it into enlargement and assure security and stability. But where is the democratic security, which is the thing that it's needed in all these countries? And how to, you know, if we have a look backwards and see, okay, we introduced the rule of law mechanism inside the European Union, you know, internal sanctions to, you know, cutting off funds to, you know, the bad boys in the room. But then we've seen that because of the war, because of geopolitical reasons, those banners have been get taken off. For Poland, because, he was a good guy, or at least he was on the front line of the war. So they was not implemented for Poland, it was implemented for Hungary, but Hungary has, their own mechanisms to deal inside of the European Council, and, if you want sanctions against Russia, you have to come with me, so you have to give me funds. So it's not working as it should be working. So I think we have to work further on that, and probably it's coming into the second panel, because part of also of the deepening of the European Union, how to want to make it. So again, I think the time is the war. It's the name time. So if we want to go faster, we have to think if we want a geopolitical Europe with a rule of law, or with a rule of law very damaged and a democracy very damaged, and we have to take that decision. Because basically all those actors in the European Union landscape that wanted to go faster are the ones, because of geopolitical reasons, because they are front line of the eastern part of the European Union, or because they are illiberal and they want to, support wider Europe, taking the role of the old proposal coming from UK, that, expand, no, deepening. So we are again at the same dilemma it was at the beginning. And with one more thing, that the ones who were the speeding up of the integration process, they were France and Germany, are damaged right now. So we had to put our efforts in some other players. And what are those other players? So who are they? Italy, yeah, Weimar Triangle, but Poland, you have Tusk right now, but then you have the second force, peace, and the third force is extreme right, which is an excision of peace. So we have, a balance of forces in Poland. So the next round of elections in Poland can go back forward. So, and Hungary is quite stabilized. No changes, approaches. I mean, of course, Orban just lost some power, but not much. And also Peter Magyar is not really, I not trust him anymore. I mean, not since the beginning. He's, part of the establishment made up by Orban. And I think we were failing if we trusted him. And I would be very aware about him. And also, so the things that the European Union should make, from my point of view, towards enlargement is to put very clear boundaries for any backsliding in the candidate countries. Of course, trying to be faster on that, but with the numbers now in the European Parliament and in the European Council, we cannot forget that. It might be complicated to find a faster solution for that. And also we have to count on the building up of the strategic autonomy. How are we going to build up? Could you imagine in the Matignon, Bardella, and then planning with Macron, which is, not in its best moments right now, or if you have a look to Scholz and all the political parties in the German government who are, falling apart. And then we have elections in some eastern landers in Germany over the next months, and for sure they're not going to win there. So all the leverage that they used to be in the Weimar Triangle is going to be part of Tusk, which is the strongest man in the Weimar Triangle. So, and Tusk is talking with whom? Mitsotakis, and with Feijóo here. So that's the new triangle, but Feijóo is not in government. So are they, ready to not talking with the far right, all of them?
But okay,
there are some internal matters.
Absolutely. Many of us would like to be around the table of the dinner tonight in Brussels, but we are not, unfortunately, and we'll see what comes out of that. I just would like to say, before I turn to the audience, two things. First of all, we have to bear in mind what Charles said in his introduction. I mean, the worst case scenario is not necessarily the one which will materialize. So we have to be prepared for the worst case, but it's not necessarily the one which will materialize. The second thing is that we were referring to the two of the three Copenhagen criteria, which were the economic and the democratic one, but we should also bear in mind the other one, the third one, which is the implementation of the acquis. And what strikes me, we discussed that already in other circumstances, is that the difference between the 2004 enlargement and this one is that the acquis nowadays is much heavier to swallow. I mean, I don't know about the North Macedonian negotiating team, but 5 years ago, they had nothing which looked like today the Fit for 55 package of legislation, including the natural restoration law, which was adopted this morning thanks to the untiring Belgian Presidency. So, I mean, that should also be factored in terms of impact and requirement attached to the enlargement for the candidate countries. Now, I promise I turn to the audience, please. Is there a microphone in the room? Yes, indeed, there is one. Of time, and I hope inspiration to prepare your question. Over to you. I see Ignacio, yes?
Thank you very much. It was an extremely interesting panel. I would like to ask Mrs. Karamfilova-Panowska on the regatta approach versus the big bang enlargement. If you look to the different waves of enlargement in the history of the European Union, I think the only ones, and I'm thinking on Greek accession, the European institutions use a kind of approach of divide et impera, because when you think that, for example, in the case of Spain and Portugal, they joined together. We recently had an interview with former Prime Minister Mr. González, who told us that Portugal suffered to some extent the idea that Spain and Portugal have to join together. Then, in the next wave of enlargement, all former neutral countries, Austria, Sweden, Finland, together. Then we have the 2004 enlargement. Bulgaria and Romania was, I mean, even Bulgaria and Romania are, I mean, were they acknowledged that they weren't ready, but they joined only 3 years afterwards. Then was the case of Croatia, and now, well, now we have the temptation from the European Union to see, well, to demonstrate that enlargement is alive. We can go for a, let's say, easy case. It's easy, for example, you mentioned Montenegro as the front runner. Well, in the case of Western Balkan, we may agree that for different reasons, Serbia, Bosnia, and Kosovo perhaps are not precisely front runner right now. But if for example, Montenegro is co-opted, is selected to join the European Union before North Macedonia and Albania, it's just an hypothesis. I would like to know, do you think that this would be terrible for, in the case of North Macedonia, trying to join the European Union, or otherwise could be the demonstration that the process is alive, that is merit-based, it's not going to be, for the current member state, they want to show all the candidates that you need to comply with the acquis, with all the other Copenhagen criteria, but at the same time, it would be well, kind of disappointment for candidates. So I would like to know, because this is when we discuss about try to have all candidates together or have this regatta approach. I would like to know how do you feel that from the North Macedonia point of view?
Absolutely no problem as far as North Macedonia is considered Montenegro to be accepted, speaking country by country. First, if we speak in terms of the impact and how this effort would undermine the even now shaken credibility of the enlargement process, that's a topic to be discussed. it's true that based on merits, Montenegro is the best one or the first one to progress, hopefully, if they continue with this pace in the future. But I think that European Union, together with the governments in the region, needs to do its best and maximum to make other countries also ready for enlargement within the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Because if we speak, in Macedonia, currently we have political issue. We have the problem with the negotiating framework stating, it's not a problem, it's a reality, that we have to change our constitution to include Bulgarians, for which the opposition is against, and we need a 2/3 majority in the parliament to be voted. Maybe it will happen. Once it happens, we proceed to the negotiating chapters, to clusters and negotiating chapters, and we, in terms of approximation of legislation, we are close to Montenegro, plus minus. So there have to be, Serbia, also in terms of approximation of legislation, they are good. They have other issues pertaining, having Vucic there and his ties with Orban putting, and the China investments coming in at a large scale, which is also a question of the enlargement policy and the European EU presence in the region. So to keep it short, counting on technical issues, best Montenegro comes in first, fine. Question is, what message are we sending? What is the impact? What is the credibility? What is the transformative role of enlargement process in European Union as far as Western Balkans is concerned? And how it come that country like North Macedonia, I'm not subjective, was first signing the SAA, needed that much time. What's wrong here? I mean, lots has been wrong on our side, speaking as governments and political leadership and commitment. 20 years, come on, there has to be. So that's more or less. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Come on, please.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put an awkward question. Reading the title of our conference today, Defining a Widened Europe, EU enlargement process, we have spoken a lot about the East, but I started dealing with EU affairs in 1969, even more, 1886, when we joined the EU. There was a candidate country, Turkey. It has disappeared. That's just the question.
I was in a way waiting for that question. I, amongst those who think that having taken the brave and indispensable decision to open accession talks with Ukraine, we are not going to avoid in the not so distant future a serious conversation with Turkey. That's on the horizon, unavoidably. There is one element which in the question that you put, Ignacio, that you will have to answer during the second panel you are participating into, is that if we go for a different scenario than the grouped scenario, if we go for what I call the regatta scenario, then it resonates with the issue of reforms. And I mean, at what point in time shall we deem that, okay, we have now reached a number which makes absolutely unavoidable to adapt the decision-making process and to adapt the institution? But that's for the second panel. Other questions besides the awkward ones? No? Okay, then I turn to our convener. We are right on time. I really thank very warmly our panelists. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with them as much as I did. So we have now a 15-minute break, and then we'll 10 minutes break. Okay, very good, Ignacio. Right. Okay, and then we'll resume with a different, and I'm sure as challenging and interesting panel as this one. Thank you very much.
It was not the best performance, but I was.
You did well.
Okay, hello everyone. We are going to start the second panel, which is called Defining a Deepened Europe, EU Reform Prospects. We are having this panel after the first one, which was about enlargement, because as the enlargement debate is gaining ground on the European agenda, and it seems that it's going to be at the center of the agenda for the upcoming cycle, the reform debate is the other side of the same coin, and it has always been like that. It's not new. When the European Union is going to enlarge, it has had to also think about internal reforms needed to absorb new members, how to adapt its institutions, its budget, its decision making. The thing now is that this debate seems to be much more complex, more crucial, because of the difficulties that those candidate countries have, because the impact that they could have in the European Union. And we are talking about big member states in some cases, member states which will attract huge amounts of the European budget as it is designed nowadays. And because we have to address also challenges for the European Union that go beyond the enlargement debate itself, because the European Union needs to prepare for a much more difficult and unprecedented context. So to address this issue and all these questions, we have an excellent panel. Let me introduce you to them. We have the Ambassador Frank Arnauts. He's Senior Coordinator for the Future of Europe, EU Strategic Foresight and Open Autonomy at the Belgian Ministry for Foreign Affairs. We have also Melchior, sorry if I don't say it correctly, Panik, Head of the Brussels Office of the Policy Institute for International Affairs, and Ignacio Molina, he's Senior Analyst for Europe at the Elcano Royal Institute. We are going to have this session until 8:30, when we will have the closing remarks. So if you agree, we are going to have, as the first session, 2 rounds of interventions. And at the end, I will open the floor for the rest of the audience. The idea is to have a dynamic conversation. You already know it, so please keep your interventions up to 6-7 minutes. I will let you know when the time is finished. So let's start, please, with Ambassador Frank Arnauts. Belgium is now holding the rotating presidency of the Council. You are a senior official at the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Belgium. So could you tell us how is this debate among member states? Is there a consensus? Which reforms are on the table right now? At which states is the conversation now? So please, Ambassador, when you want, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the organizing of inviting me to contribute to this discussion on what we call the future of Europe, which is the process of internal reforms. The jury is still out, but very soon, on the 27th and 28th of June, there will be conclusions of the European Council will be adopted. And like it was already said at the end of the Spanish presidency, there will be conclusions on a roadmap for the internal reforms of the EU. So they're already in draft version circulating for the moment. So, but like I said, there will be public at the end of the month. What the Belgian presidency has done for the past 6 months is building on the excellent work already by the Swedish and then the Spanish presidency to push forward this reflection on, indeed, what should be in this roadmap. It is a leaders-driven process. Charles Michel has made this clear from the beginning. This is Chefsache. This is in the hand of the leaders. But both the Spanish presidency, but also the Belgian presidency, heard very clearly from the council, from the ministers and the councils, especially the General Affairs Council, that is also the General Affairs Council, who is more or less the guardian of the good functioning of the institution of the council. So the General Affairs Council as the guardian of the good functioning of the council. so that we should have a say on this as well, that we should contribute to what should be in this roadmap. And that's what we have done during the past 6 months. We have done this by organizing expert seminars, informal discussions at Director General's level for European Affairs, informal discussion at ministers. We had also formal discussion at the General Affairs Council and so on. And then you could see there's a kind of convergence of views, and we have put this convergence of views in a progress report from the Belgian Presidency, and that has been circulated among the member states. So we have more or less a clear view where this convergence is, and it's not exactly where going in convergence with the discussion we had here so far in the room, I would say. I think the discussion on reform, internal reform, gained momentum again, indeed, when Charles Michel said that the EU should be ready for enlargement by 2030, and then a kind of shockwave of consciousness, of awareness went to Europe and said, oh, we have an enormous challenge here, and then people start. It coincided more or less with the 20th anniversary of the Big Bang enlargement we have been talking about. So people started to make parallels and said, this will be maybe another 10 member states joining the EU. So we have to make big reforms to make the EU ready for that enlargement process. And then we also had the German-French non-governmental paper, which focused very much on institutional reforms. And so we made this parallel with the previous, the Big Bang, where we had a treaty change, we had the adaptation of the decision-making procedures, even of the institutional setup of the Union. So the first reaction of this is something so big that we need a treaty change again, and we need an institutional reform again. And then what happened during the Spanish presidency, and even more throughout the Belgian presidency, that we noticed a kind of reality check. And we checked the political reality with the member states. We went into consultations, we had those meetings, and then we noticed that just the word reform create a lot of concern and even critical attitude with many member states. Mm-hmm. They saw that this important challenge of enlargement, but at the same time, member states said, many of them said that the Lisbon Treaty is fit for enlargement, and some even said it's fit even for the future. So that put us in front of a challenge, and so then we deepened this consultation, and then we started to listen to the member states. So what should happen if it's not a treaty change, if it's not the institutional reform, moving more from consensus decision-making on many policy items to QMV, if we have more member states. And then, little by little, the insight developed that, and this is already, if you read the Council conclusions of the 15th of December, the European Council conclusions, if you read them well, it's already in those decisions. It says, as the Union enlarges, successful European integration requires that Union policies, and it stressed policies, be fit for the future and financed in a sustainable way, and it stressed again financed, based on the values on which the Union is founded, and that the EU institutions continue to function effectively. And then further on says to ensure that we should advance in parallel, stressed so the parallelism between the enlargement process and the reform process. They are linked, but they advance in parallel to ensure that both future member states and the EU are ready at the time of accession. So this contains the elements of what we have found out, where that the convergence is developing. What, if we still want to talk about internal reform, what internal reform should be about. It's about that we have to identify what we want to do together, how to finance it, and then how we have to organize the governance of the EU to make this possible. And this does not necessarily mean far-reaching, far-fetching institutional reform. And this is where that the convergence has developed, and that's also what is included in this progress report of the Belgian Presidency. The point is that there are three drivers of reform. So it's enlargement helped to build up again this momentum on reform. It gave it a sense of urgency, but definitely in Belgium and other countries, we already looking at, in a very worried way at the functioning of the EU as it is now. If we, for instance, see how one member state can now block for several months the functioning of the EU foreign policy, that we cannot adopt any positions anymore. So you can already see that we are not working very well at this moment. So apart from enlargement, the second driver of reform, as we call it, is actually the fact that the EU at this moment, we have been very good at dealing with the crisis, like the COVID crisis and the energy crisis, the invasion of Russia and Ukraine. We did that all very well. But the overall functioning of the EU, there's definitely room of improvement. And I mentioned, for instance, the inefficiency and decision-making on foreign policy. And then the third driver of reform, apart from enlargement and the internal functioning, is actually how to deal with the fact that the position, the critical mass, the relative weight, the impact that the EU has in the international environment, which is more and more fragmented and more and more based on very crude power play, how we as a very complex entity which goes for quality, which goes for sustainability and so on, for a value-based approach, how can we still maintain our position in this changing world? So you have three very important factors of reform. And also we still have to sell this reform to our public opinion. So communication is very important. And if you want to communicate, you want to convince, you want to ensure a buy-in from your population, and you link this reform process only to enlargement. And some speakers already have alluded to it. Enlargement is, people see the best as a necessity that has to happen, also following the invasion of Ukraine, that for geopolitical reasons, that this might be a necessity, but it's definitely not a very popular issue. So if we want to convince our population and our citizens that reform has to be done, we have to tell them that this has to be done in the interest not only of the citizens of future member states, but also in the interest of existing member states. And this is a key message, that we have to ensure that the EU remains fit for the future in the interest of also the existing citizens of the member states, to make sure that the EU will serve their interests at least as well as the EU is doing it now, and preferably even better in the interest of their security and prosperity and the quality of their life. So that, I see that you... No. Type control is playing, so that is actually where we are pushing this agenda on the basis of a very comprehensive consultation with the member states. So internal reform process will be a process with its own rationale, not only driven by enlargement. Enlargement will be very important, but we have to look at those policies For instance, agriculture policy, yes, it will be very much impacted by with the accession of Ukraine. But the agriculture policy and the budget going to agriculture, common agriculture policy will also be impacted because there will be other new priority policies. Like if we really want to go into defense, that everybody says yes, we have to invest more in defense and in promotion of defense industry. We have also to make sure that we have decided the Green Deal, but we forgot perhaps to a certain extent how to finance and how to facilitate the implementation of the Green Deal by our companies, and in the meantime ensure that competitiveness and the openness of the internal market. If we want to serve all those new objectives, we really have to revisit how we constitute the budget. So we have a very important policy shift, which is already a reform. The biggest reform will be the reform of the budget. Mm-hmm. And this will be a very big challenge because at the same time, there's no money. And all the member states, including Belgium, they will say we give 1% of our GDP to the EU. We are not sure that we can change this because we have already a high level of debt already in our own budget. So we have to look at other ways to finance the own resources, but is this feasible? And where are you going to find this? Should we follow the example of Next Gen EU, go back to the capital market, but we have already to start serving the debt of Next Gen EU in 2028. So I think that it's actually the budget who will be the main challenge. And then finally, it's a governance. I think that the way we will deal with this new policy shifts will require at least a high level of orthodoxy of process management. For instance, on the functioning of the Commission, we have to go back to very strict, coherent and comprehensive impact assessments. When new policies are decided by the Commission, the driver cannot only be either emergencies, crisis or politics, but should be motivated by comprehensive and technically based and sound impact assessment, guaranteeing this coherence. So these will be the key elements of what we see reform, and then over time we will not avoid the discussion about the decision-making procedures, but this will not be the priority for the coming years, I think. And I know that we are here with think tanks. I think it's the responsibility of the think tank community of reminding us that probably this will not be good enough, but I think we have to function in an environment where we also after the European Parliament elections, they were not as dramatic as we might have expected perhaps, but we see more and more member states, and within many member states also parts of the public opinion, who are very much attached to sovereignty, and the idea that we still take better care with things if we do it at national level or even regional level, and not to get. Big parts of public opinion are convinced that not always EU is the best solution. So therefore, I think we have to explain very well in the coming years that why do we want to do something at the EU level, and why we should not respect the principle of subsidiarity. So this has to be very well explained. And otherwise, we will have a legitimacy problem in the EU.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will maybe stop here.
Thank you very much. You were mentioning things that I wanted Melchior to touch upon, because you were mentioning the think tanks environment, those exchanges that you were carrying out during the Belgian Presidency. So, and you mentioned the Franco-German paper. So, Melchior, I wanted to ask you about your opinion on this. Do you find those proposals, there is the Franco-German one, but also proposals coming from Swedish, from Lithuanian think tanks, do you find them interesting? Is there something missing? What's your view on that?
Thank you very much, Raquel, and let me start by echoing other panelists and by thanking the organizers for holding this event and for inviting me to speak. It was already said a number of times in this room that discussions on deepening and widening went hand in hand in the past. So it's relatively unsurprising that this discussion is now with us as we are witnessing a revival of enlargement policy. So a more dynamic discussion on deepening is accompanying it. And indeed, a report prepared by a group of French and German think tankers and academics is an important part of the discussion. First of all, I believe because it constitutes a very comprehensive reform package. And secondly, and perhaps most importantly, is that it is done under the auspices of the governments of both countries. So it has some critical mass, I would say. And the point of departure of this report is that the EU is not ready for enlargement, neither policy-wise nor institutionally. Consequently, the authors propose a package of reforms that concern and that pertain to policies, to institutions, and to the budget. So it's, as I said, it's a very comprehensive package. And in short, I'll try to describe it in a couple of sentences. It advocates closer integration, adding competences to the EU, making the EU budget bigger, and streamlining the EU governance by abolishing unanimity, not completely, but in a number of policy areas such as foreign policy and taxation. And the authors proposed differentiated integration as a solution to the problems of visible differences between member states in their views on the future of Europe and in their appetites for closer integration. So they propose an EU of concentric circles, which would be more flexible and which would offer member states options whether they want to focus on the single market or whether they want to integrate more closely. And I perceive this report as an important contribution. I perceive it as an attempt to forge compromise between the member states and somehow provoke an agreement between those who are the main advocates of institutional reforms and other member states who are skeptical and wary of closer integration and of changing the treaties, making changes to EU institutions. Even though the authors clearly indicate the options that they consider optimal, they always offer some alternatives. So it's, as I said, it kind of prepares the way for a compromise. So, for example, they say that the Commission, that there could be fewer commissioners, but another option would be to introduce a hierarchy and to have, for example, 2 commissioners responsible for one policy area. They advocate for more QMV, but they also claim that the way in which a qualified majority is defined could be open to negotiations. And they also offer different ways in which the reform could proceed, either via treaty change or based on the avenues available within Lisbon Treaty. And the proposals, I would say, are relatively cautious. They are not revolutionary. They generally gather the ideas that were circulating in the academic and think tank debate. So they encourage debate and compromise, but they also, in a way, they also spell out a certain warning for the countries that are not willing to enter into a discussion. They also say that it might be necessary for the most determined states to proceed in a coalition of the willing, and such coalition of the willing could even have their own budget. So it is, I would say, a serious warning for the countries that are reluctant to discuss reforms. And the experts clearly say that if there is no compromise, then the cohesion of the EU could suffer because of that. And the debate that followed this report, was, well, I believe the proposals were not that comprehensive. Most of the articles published by academics, by think tankers, focused on certain aspects of the problem. And generally they discussed, first of all, whether reforms are necessary or not, and whether they are feasible, whether they are likely to materialize, and whether the EU should try to reform by using the mechanisms contained in the Lisbon Treaty, or whether opening a discussion on treaty change is a valuable option. And in the discussion, there are also different views whether widening and deepening proceed hand in hand. So you can, I believe the majority of think tankers, especially Brussels-based, believe it is the case and believe deepening is necessary for widening. But you can also find different opinions. And for example, a German academic, Tanja Berzel, who published an article that was a part of a publication by the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. She argues that it is the contrary, that actually deepening could make enlargement less likely. So there are different views on the interrelation between widening and deepening. And perhaps before I finish, a few words on the debate in Poland. There are different views, but the dominant view is that deepening is not necessary for enlargement, that the Lisbon Treaty is so-called enlargement proof, and that we could have enlargement within the Lisbon Treaty. Obviously, some reforms could be debated, but it is not a very good idea to tackle treaty change at the moment, because the EU has more important problems. And discussing treaty change could make the member states actually even more divided than they are at the moment. So I believe most Polish academics, most think tankers believe it's not a good idea to discuss treaty change. You can also, some arguments that you can find is that smaller states are quite apprehensive when they see the main reforms that are proposed. So it is important for them to maintain a veto when it comes to important policy areas such as foreign policy, for example. And it's important also for them to have a commissioner. So they are wary of a smaller commission. And sometimes you can also encounter a view that the push for deepening is actually a bit of a smokescreen, and that it is used mainly to delay enlargement. And when it comes to differentiated integration, I think the majority of Polish academic community is not very keen on differentiated integration for two reasons. First of all, it is important to maintain unity within the EU, and secondly, that it would be actually, while on the surface differentiated integration seems quite appealing, if you dig a bit deeper, it turns out that it is actually quite difficult to implement it, and it would be difficult for a smaller group of member states really to proceed with integration without, for example, provoking negative consequences for the single market. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Melchior. To end this first round, Ignacio, I just wanted you to react to what has been exposed, especially from a Spanish perspective. So, Ignacio, when you want.
Thank you very much, Raquel. First of all, I would like to, because it's very much connected to my answer to, or my reaction to what has been said. I have to start with, with underlining how happy I am here to, to have in this seminar, and I have to congratulate and thank Ambassador Cox and also José de Pierrepont for the efforts, and of course also Egmont Institute and Jean-Louis de Brube. It's very interesting that the first time that a Belgian and a Spanish think tank organized this seminar, and we want to have this initiative to be continuing with a new roundtable, new event in Brussels. When we were discussing which topic for a conversation between a Spanish think tank and a Belgian think tank right now, we could have talk about economic security, trade, global south, migration, Ukraine, and very naturally, the future of Europe, the enlargement and reform as the most important strategic, from the point of view of the architecture of the European integration process, is enlargement and reform. Very naturally, we reached to the conclusion that we had to deal with that. So that's amazing. I mean, it's remarkable because both countries, and I don't want to, I'm going to say perhaps are the two member states in which the project of the nation themselves are more interlinked with the success of the process of European integration. There are other countries, there are other member states that are very much linked, for example, Germany, for example, and probably we may have a review of all of them, but I think if Belgium and Spain, considering our, how the strength and the weakness of both countries, and how much important for them the European integration process is very obvious. But secondly, when we organized this panel, contrary to our French and German colleagues, we rapidly decided to invite not just Belgian and Spaniards, but also to invite, if we are going to deal with enlargement, let's invite someone from the Baltic countries, let's invite someone from the Western Balkans. If we're going to deal with reform, someone from Poland. So that's also interesting. It's an exercise that is open. So let me connect these two things, because I really think that Belgium and Spain have a responsibility in this, in this dialogue, in this reflection about the future of Europe. Of course, I'm not going to speak on behalf of Spain and Belgium, not even Belgium. We have, and in some minutes we will have the authorities from both foreign ministry to talk on behalf of the countries. But I really think that it's really needed, because when there is some member states, including Poland with the current government, but all analysts, journalists, pundits say, well, this is a pro-European liberal government. But even in this case, as you have said, the current Polish government is a skeptic about, to deepen the European Union or to before an enlargement. So Poland and other Central Eastern European countries are defending enlargement, but they don't see the necessity to put the house in order, the same that we, at least in Spain and Belgium, do. And it's interesting because, when you think about, the Visegrad Group, for example, Visegrad Group, because of the war in Ukraine, we know that is not in the now very healthy. But when you think, Visegrad Group is a important group of pressure within the Council, within the European Council, of some important member states, including Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, with specific ideas about the future of Europe, not the most pro-federalist countries. And they were very successful, at least until the war, on making their points. How is the weight of the Visegrad Group at the Council? So I invite you to have a look to the Council. They represent exactly 13.5% of the Council. if you combine Spain and Belgium, is exactly 13.5 of the Council. But they don't make our case and defending that we need a deepened Europe. We need a deepened Europe. It's absolutely necessary, not just because if we want to enlarge the European Union, that we do. It's important to remark that Spain and Belgium have taken seriously the idea that enlargement has to be done to the Western Balkans, and also for more geopolitical reasons to Ukraine, Moldova, and probably Georgia. But that, not just for that, but because the European Union, considering the challenge that we have, not only Russia, but also China, not only the US, but also in terms of the governance of the euro, the institutional architecture for taking decision in CFSP on taxation, that we need to do this. So I really think that we have this responsibility, and think tanks from both countries have a special responsibility because, as you have said, the government has to be, normally, the government have to be more pragmatic, the government have to find compromise, and the task of think tanks is precisely to think and try to be disruptive in thinking. So I really would like to underline this as a responsibility, and how fortunate it is that we have decided to deal with that. Of course, we know that there is, we have now a new cycle of 5 years, starting tonight, probably in the dinner, in the formal summit taking place right now in Brussels. And probably we are not going to have neither enlargement or reform in the next 5 years. But next 5 years, as the strategic agenda is going to underline, are key for framing the discourse, framing the debate. So, and I really think there is momentum. Of course, if you think, well, to reform treaty has to be made by unanimity, it's impossible. Well, okay, this is could be, but we know, and Melchior has, when talking about the German-French report, that we have reform treaty, but also Plan B for improving the governance of the European Union without the necessity to change the treaties. But we have to push this debate. It's very important. And you remember that before Russian aggression to Ukraine, we had the conference on the future of Europe, and nobody took seriously. I mean, the idea of well, nobody. I mean, we by the way, we were involved in that. We were involved in debate with citizens, and we were very active. But the idea was there's no real momentum for reforming Europe. So it's interesting that precisely because enlargement now is high on the agenda, and precisely because we really think that perhaps not in the short term, but in the mid-term, we talk about 6-7 years. Charles Michel talked about 2030. Well, not the short term, but in 6-7 years, perhaps we are going to have a new member state join the European Union. We need absolutely to deal with this debate, and that's great. That's great because this means that we, of course, we know that we are 27. We are going to be, hopefully, more than 27. It's really difficult to find a compromise, but, and I stop here, if there are no member states, such as Spain and Belgium, insisting on how important it is, for sure we are going to listen only to those reluctant member states that are more clear. They are not afraid of talking about sovereignty, no more transfer of power to the European institutions. So we really need to play this game, and we need to be very, I mean, and that's my final point, is some kind of advertising. We are going to, we have worked in the Elcano Institute in a report with some views from a Spanish perspective, but not representing Spain, but experts from Spain, and that we will publish after the summer. And we would like to involve other think tanks from other member states in the conversation in the next 5 years about enlargement and reform. And I think Belgian partnership is crucial, is key on that, and I'm very happy that we are here today and stop here.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. Before opening the floor for the rest of the audience, I would like just to ask you a concrete question to all of you, which is, from your point of view, which reforms should be implemented or are imperative before any enlargement, and which reforms are imperative regardless any enlargement? So please, Ambassador.
I think it's in line with my first intervention. I think we have to be ambitious and pragmatic at the same time. And I think I agree with Mr. Molina. I think that Belgium and Spain together have a special responsibility in this regard. I think we are the two countries, I think, which at this moment have the most prospective and most positive perspective on Europe, and that Europe serves us very well. And I think we have for us, it's not difficult to say that. And in many countries, there's a lot of difficult reflections and this tension between sovereignty and the European agenda and so on. But I think that also I had consultations today at the ministry and at the Presidencia, and so European cooperation in Belgian and Spanish perspective feels natural, and I think we should use this joint belief that Europe is good for us, and that we should push forward and instill this trust in the European future and architecture, also in the other member states, and continue spreading the gospel and the good message. I think we have quite an important responsibility. There are other member states as well, but also with the consultations I had in the previous 6 months, I felt this particularly always a very normal, forward-looking dialogue when they spoke with Spain, others as well, like Croatia and neighboring countries of Belgium as well, and so. But it was very typical for me to have this with Spain. So that's one thing. So then, but one of the things that our Prime Minister said when we started the presidency is that we have to deliver. I think we have to deliver and show the people that, like I said in my previous intervention, that the EU serves the interest, the prosperity, the security, the safety, and also the quality of life of the citizens. And that is what we have to do, at least definitely at this moment where there is such quite a lot of feelings of reserve, of questioning of the purpose, of the functioning of the EU. I think we have to show and explain that in this world where the EU is losing weight, where we're losing impact, that we only by working together, by cooperation, by solidarity, by being together more agile and having impact on the world, that we take care of ourselves and also take care of the rest of the world. And we also do this, including by enlargement. Enlargement is not questioned. It's just we have to show that it serves the purpose of the enlargement countries and it serves the purpose of the existing member states. So I think this doesn't look and doesn't sound very visionary. It's very pragmatic, but I think this reconstructing of trust is essential, and we reconstruct this trust by delivering. And delivering is, at the 27th, 28th of June, we will not only have this roadmap for the future of Europe, but we will have the strategic agenda, which will describe the policies that the European Council thinks the European institutions should deal with in the coming 5 years, the coming legislative cycle. It's about a free and democratic Europe, it's about a prosperous and competitive Europe, and it's about a strong, assertive Europe. So these are the 3 things that we should deliver upon. And then see how we have to adjust our policies, like I said, how we have to adjust the adoption of our budget and the functioning of the EU. And this might not be very super ambitious, but I think that's a job that has to be done. And like I said, also, I think the think tanks have to keep us focused also that this will not be enough. It is not enough. And also as Belgium, we I almost could say we love reform. We have been reforming our country sometimes every decade, and we have been also among the key architects of the European architecture. So we are good at reform and we love reform, but I think it's not the moment now. And if we have to improve the working methods of the EU, it's about those things I mentioned before, without losing out of sight also that we have one day to move perhaps from consensus to QMV. But it's definitely not in agenda now, because you need consensus to change those things, and the consensus is definitely not there. And like you said, it's very often with the small member states, because the small member states, they see consensus as a guarantee for not being run over by the big member states. So there's definitely no appetite for changing that. But if we all trust again more in the EU, and every member state sees the EU as serving not only the common but also its national interest, then we can make a next step. But first we have to deliver, I would say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Melchior, in your opinion?
Thanks very much. So could enlargement happen without deepening? In theory, yes, but I believe in practice it's rather impossible. Especially if we consider the fact that the two largest member states, that the leaders of the two largest member states clearly stated that for them the EU must deepen as it widens. So I believe reform is necessary, and for enlargement, but not only for enlargement. That we can name a number of reforms that simply would strengthen the union, whether it manages to enlarge or not. I guess probably the most important one is agreeing on a larger budget, and perhaps not first and foremost because of enlargement, but because of other necessities, such as continuing the Green Deal, which will be very difficult without larger means, paying off next generation EU, and also making good on the priority, which is boosting the capacity of EU industry. But I believe the current circumstances also are favorable to reconsider the issue of unanimity, which is also a subject that I'm particularly interested in. I think recent years show that unanimity is not beneficial to the EU, that it leads to suboptimal decisions, and that it delays decision-making process. And if we look to the future, we can also, it's quite easy to imagine negative consequences of unanimity. So we can imagine a situation in which a member state, which does not fulfill Copenhagen criteria anymore, will block accession of a candidate country that meets the Copenhagen criteria. So that would show how absurd unanimity could be. Of course, is it likely that unanimity, that we will abolish unanimity? Not very much. Nor is unanimity a silver bullet. Of course, it will not solve all our problems, and this is actually emphasized by certain analysts such as Andrew Duff and Tanya Berzel that I mentioned before, that they stress the fact that QMV will not erase different interests between member states. So it's not a silver bullet, but it is an option that is worth considering, and it could be a security valve for the EU. That is actually why I argue that the best modality to reform the EU would be discussing treaty change, because I believe this would create a larger room for maneuver for the member states, and it would enable them to seek for other solutions than QMV. Because with the Lisbon Treaty, we can only go from unanimity to qualified majority voting. Whereas with treaty change, there would be a plethora of other options that could be considered, such as supermajorities consisting of, I don't know, 80, 90% of member states, and that would enable the Union to avoid blockages related to unanimity. Since citizens were mentioned, I just wanted to stress that it would be wrong to assume that citizens are dead set against institutional reforms. For example, if you look at a recent poll made in Poland, 59% of Poles agree that the Union there is still room for closer integration. So perhaps not an overwhelming majority, but still a majority. And 52% of Poles agree with the statement that a single member state should not be allowed to block decisions. So I believe if we look at citizens' opinion, there is some hope that they are not completely against discussing such things as abolishing unanimity. And perhaps just two points. When it comes, because in my previous statement, I didn't refer so much to the government position, but more to the debate between academics. But nevertheless, the government position is quite close. But if we look at the minister's last statement made in spring, when he presented priorities to the parliament, the Minister for Foreign Affairs admitted that Poland is not completely closed to discussing some ideas for reform, including for reform of the decision-making process. And he even claimed that there would be some proposals coming from Poland. So we'll see what happens in the future. And if there is, because you also asked me if there is something missing, I think it would be worthwhile to perhaps give more thought to differentiated integration, to how the EU could accommodate these different these circles or tiers, and how this could proceed without creating too much disturbance to the institution as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, great. A lot of things on the table: budget, unanimity, differentiated integration. Ignacio, which one would you pick?
I'm going to say a reform that is not necessary to be done. So I hope to be to help with that. But before that, a reminder. Some months ago, the Committee on Constitutional Affairs of the European Parliament drafted, negotiated, and finally passed a proposal for reforming the treaties. It was passed in the plenary of the European Parliament with 291 votes in favor, 274 against, and 44 abstention. The new Parliament that is going to be, in next month, is going to appoint a new president and start to work in the fall. It probably, because of even if we have said, Charles probably has said that yes, the result of the election is more or less that we keep this central great coalition, but we know that has been eroded. So when you look to this number, you see that not even in the European Parliament, which is the most pro-European institution, you have, it's strong enough to ask for ambitious reform. So we have to be very pragmatic, very cautious. I said before that we have to push for that from Spain and Belgium, but at the same time, we have to select how to do it. And I think that even if we love institutional reform, think tankers, scholars on European institutions love this institutional discussion, and because we think that the golden decades of the European integration with a single European Act, Maastricht Treaty, Amsterdam Treaty, the Constitutional Treaty is connected to, well, this is what the European Union should do. I think that institutional reform is not an end in itself. So first of all, we have to discuss about what we need in terms of policies. So look to what happened with the internal market. It's very interesting that, and I think it's very good news, that report from Enrico Letta, that report from Mario Draghi is, attracting this kind of attention that you need to reform the internal market, that you have to, after the pandemic, you have to have a look to the competence of the Union on health, and of course, on the context of aggression to Ukraine, the competences of the Union on security and defense. So policies, and of course the Eurozone crisis about the governance of the Euro. After policies, after the discussion on policies, and I very much agree that that is independent on enlargement, but enlargement helped to deal with that, we have to discuss about funding. So that's the competences policies, then how we are going to pay for that. And it's, now that we have, after recovery package next generation with original system of funding, we have to talk about, I mean, European public goods. And so at the third stage, only after this, having discussed policies and funding, we have to deal with the institutional debate. And as I promised, I'm going just to mention a reform that is not, in my opinion, is not needed. Everybody says the reform we have to do is the number of commissioners. Well, first of all, it's already done because it's on the treaties. But, well, apart from that, I really think that the treaty already said that the Commission, can be reduced because not all member states, and this is a compromise in the European Council when Ireland, in the, I think was the Lisbon Treaty ratification referendum that they, okay. So it's already, but it's not, I'm not saying this because I think that it's already done, it's just a decision of the European Council that it is. But I really think, and Melchior has underlined this, that all member states, I mean, even North Macedonia, when hopefully join the European Union sooner the better, want to have a commissioner in the room. And it's perfectly legitimate. The point here is not that we have a commission, or like a college of commissioners with, I don't know, 35 commissioners that are involved in the discussion about, legislative initiative. The point is that you don't need 35 portfolios. You can have 35 commissioners and perhaps half of them without portfolio. They are members of the college. They are part of the debate about the initiative of the Commission, or the Commission as the guardian of the treaties, of the Commission implementing the law, the legislation that has been passed by the Council and the Parliament. But we have, I think, maybe when you look to the, for example, have you ever seen a picture of the British cabinet? Yeah, I don't know how many cabinet members in the case of UK, almost 30 or 35, and I mean, it's functional. The point is not that you have many members in the discussion. That I think, if I were a small member state, I would like to be represented in the college. But look, only 12, 15 real portfolios. So we sometimes are involved in very rationalistic discussion that are not needed. You are more pragmatic. And to end, I think it's very interesting, a serious debate about differentiated integration, about multi-speed Europe. If we are going to, and you have been, it's very nicely explained how in the Franco-German report, the idea of differentiated integration is a warning. If you don't want to make reform, well, the willing can go with differentiated integration and with concentric circle, even if I don't like the idea of concentric circle. But I think it's interesting. So we can organize differentiated integration in a way that the European Union doesn't become a Frankenstein. So, well, when everybody says about what Euro, economic and monetary union, the euro is already is obviously differentiated integration. Poland is not part of that, and Poland is member of the European Union and the internal market, of course. So if we are able to define coherent areas, and the economic and monetary union is a very good example, 2, 3, no more than 3 coherent policy areas in which differentiated integration can have its own rules, its own institutional architecture, its own budget, and it's probably the way to, to be coherent and to demonstrate those who are not willing to join differentiated integration at the beginning that it works, it's functional. So I really think that a serious debate about how differentiated integration can work or have to be defined, the design of differentiated integration, I think it would be, because you don't need reform of the treaties, or at least you don't need unanimous reform of the treaties.
Thank you very much. We have 4 minutes left, so I don't know if there is one short question. If not, maybe we can wrap up the session, so we are on time for the closing remarks. No? Okay. One there. Okay.
Very, very short.
Okay.
In line with the importance of next 5 years to frame the enlargement debate, would you consider about possible changes in French government in 2027? Do you consider that to have Le Pen party in the European...
2027, perhaps next month.
But the president in 27, potentially.
Yeah, but what do you consider about that? Do you consider as an obstacle for the enlargement debate?
I don't think we have to focus just on the Le Pen or not. I think we have to be very well aware that in the previous Big Bang there were also difficult referendums. So therefore, we have the point of communication, of buy-in, is to be very, very important, both on enlargement and on reform. And I know I repeat myself, but we have to really convince our public opinion that's in their interest to do it. And it will not be easy. And therefore, we have to be cautious, pragmatic, and so on, and be very good in convincing communication. And then we will see how those ratification of the accession treaties will go. But it will not be easy, and we have to handle this very carefully and also see both the enlargement and the reform process as two processes which are in a way linked, but have their own rationale, are parallel, and should also be explained on their own merits. I think that will be the challenge, but we have to be very conscious of but not only of Le Pen, there will be other countries where we have to explain very well the enlargement process and the reform process. Thank you.
So.
Yeah, I just can agree with the previous speaker. I think it's quite clear that if a party that is clearly against enlargement it becomes governing party, that it's a big problem for the EU, and it's not just France, it's also the Netherlands that were mentioned today by Jean-Louis. So of course there are many question marks on the horizon.
It's almost a cliché now to say that, well, you have the case of Italy with Meloni, and Italy has been quite constructive so far in the debate about enlargement and reform. I'm afraid that Le Pen or Bardella, in case he becomes prime minister, well, it's not so likely, despite the opinion polls, but is going to behave as Meloni, as prime minister of Italy. But you are right, this is an extraordinary challenge. Interestingly, I remember 7 years ago, when before the French election, I remember because it was when Donald Trump had been elected president of the U.S. and we had Brexit. The referendum had happened, and we thought about the possibility of Marine Le Pen winning the presidential elections. I remember Natalie Tocci was a speaker at the Elcano Institute, and she said it's going to be game over for the European Union if she wins. And it's no longer the case. Even if Marine Le Pen becomes president, we don't think this is game over for the European Union. So things have changed. Of course, it will be an extraordinary difficult for the European Union to digest her as president of France in case she wins elections in 2 years, in three years. But, well, I think to see the glass half full and not half empty, that now the European Union is more mature, the European Union is stronger than it was 7 years ago. And perhaps Brexit, the pandemic, and the war, have had an effect in that now when we think about the possibility of Le Pen as president is no, of course, we fear that scenario, but it's not as disastrous as it used to be some years ago.
Okay. Thank you very much. We are exactly on time, so thank you very much to all of you.
Good evening to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Belgian Presidency and particularly Ambassador Gert Cox for bringing us together to work out the definition of what a deepened and widened Europe means. Allow me as well to express my gratitude to our two foremost think tanks in Belgium and Spain, the Elcano Institute and the Real Instituto Elcano, for their intellectual contributions to this discussion, and obviously to our hosts from the European Commission, as well as to all the experts from across Europe present here today. It is very timely to have this seminar now at the end of two successive EU presidencies, which have worked hand in hand to drive forward the debate on the future of Europe. Each of them have made significant efforts, current and ongoing, for Belgium to meet the EU commitments to ramp up the pace of the enlargement process, both with the new candidates, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, as well as with the Western Balkan countries. You have our full support for the launching of negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova and for continuing the process with Montenegro. More broadly, we're also very much aligned in seeing the need to explore and exploit as far as possible adequate incentives to motivate the governments and populations that you were talking about of candidate countries to accelerate the reforms agenda. The new Western Balkans growth plan and the reform agendas from the candidate countries under this plan are a major new tool for this purpose. The seminar is also timely because after all the very fruitful preliminary discussions we held in Murcia and in Granada under the Spanish presidency, and more recently in Brussels under Belgian chairmanship, the discussion will now become more formalized and structured once the EU strategic agenda and the roadmap for the reflection on the internal reforms of the EU are discussed and adopted at the next European Council. We will thus be ready for a discussion with various milestones in preparing the EU for the enlargement process, addressing issues such as EU policy reforms, budget management, or potential institutional reforms. Let me say at the very outset that we are convinced that, to say it very simply, there must be reforms and there must be enlargement. We also believe that the new composition of the European Parliament and the balance between national governments across the EU means we still have an effective and meaningful consensus on the future of Europe, which can be successfully navigated to make both projects a success. This will take responsibility, ambition, and pragmatism, as well as a common vision of a future in which the EU is ready for the global challenges it faces, from military threats to economic and social challenges or addressing the impact of climate change. It is up to the European Union to prepare itself. You will recall that the enlargement process and the debate on union reform are, as recognized in the Granada Declaration and in successive European Council conclusions in December and March, two parallel discussions that must lead to a single objective: a stronger, enlarged European Union, enhancing its capacity to meet the goals set out in the treaties and reinforcing its sovereignty to face the challenges surrounding us.
I want to highlight a consensus that has clearly emerged over the past months and ties into both major processes. The defense of our values as a pillar of our European identity. The defense of democracy and the rule of law are the cornerstone of our values and a basic condition of trust among current member states and with our future partners. Strengthening the rule of law toolkit has been a constant element in the debates on union reform and have featured prominently in the work of the Belgian Presidency, including as an element of the roadmap. In a way, however, rule of law is not so much a part of any sequence in the upcoming policy discussion as it is a permanent feature of the evolution of the European Union and thus subject to constant improvement. That is why we welcome the gradual integration of candidates into the Union's tools to protect its values, such as the participation of Serbia, Albania, Montenegro, North Macedonia in the upcoming rule of law report cycle, or the discussions regarding an extension of conditionality to further EU financial instruments or possible improvements to the Article 7 procedure. The second major debate pertains to the Member States' reflection on what we envision for the future and how to ensure that the EU is prepared to welcome all these candidate states as full members once they are ready. Our first task is to define the roadmap for the reform, matter to be settled at this month's European Council. While there is a preliminary consensus on prioritizing the future of the internal market and defending our competitiveness on the international stage, we are also initiating debates on identifying which are the primary European public goods that benefit our citizens and that need to be fostered or preserved. This would have a reflection on the EU budget and on the budgetary debate, which will likely peak in the preparation of the next multi-annual financial framework. Additionally, among these policies, we must emphasize the growing consensus on the need to establish a true European defense industry, preparing us for the current geostrategic context and helping deter international actors who do not believe in the rules-based international order we have defended for over 70 years. Furthermore, we cannot overlook the preparations for the governance of an expanded European Union, although we are aware that this debate will be the last to occur. The reflection on extending the use of qualified majority voting, particularly in certain areas of the CFSP, limiting the use of vetoes by member states or employing constructive abstention has been explored in recent months. Additionally, a series of institutional issues, such as the size of the Commission and the follow-up of the Conference on the Future of Europe proposals, will be addressed in future debates. Following the renewed political momentum boosted by the enlargement process, it is now up to the Member States to ensure it remains a process where every step forward is grounded in corresponding merits, where candidate countries are treated equally without discrimination, and where we find ways to introduce appropriate incentives and conditionality. The goal is, and will continue to be, to welcome candidate countries into the European Union while being rigorous in preparing future members for the responsibilities of belonging to a community of values based on respect for the rule of law and an internal market founded on mutual trust. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening. I don't know. Buenas tardes. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Very good to be here in Madrid for the last 2 weeks of our presidency. Fortunately, I think we finish our presidency better than the Red Devils are beginning their competition. That's good. Let's take it as a good sign. So we have had our presidency 20 years after the Big Bang enlargement. We spoke about it. We made even an event in Brussels in order to party with the 20 added member states. I don't say new anymore, even if I could do that for 21 countries in the European Union as a privileged member of the founding fathers of the European Union, but also with the 10. So the new word is aspiring countries, I think. So it also shows how we can imagine new words in order to encompass the, let's say, rather complex reality that we are facing, because it's a complex ensemble that's translating a complex reality at the end of the day, but doing a lot of very good things. To conclude this roundtable discussion, as a new enlargement looms on the horizon, let us see where the horizon will be. I would like to summarize the Belgian views on the need to move forward in parallel on this new enlargement perspective and on the future of the EU itself. It is clear that our union is going through a Zeitenwende, a paradigm shift. This change is driven by the prospect of a new wave of enlargement, but we believe that enlargement is not the only challenge or reason for internal reform. It is imperative that the European Union engages in a broader process of reflection on its future, and that's what we did today. As explained earlier, we believe that three drivers of reforms underline our need for reflection. And actually, and it has been exposed partly by Ambassador Frank Arnault, we are using a very basic thing. That's the la théorie des ensembles in French that we learned in primary school, and the theory of sets. And the first set is a better functioning. The second set is enlargement, and the third set is a changing world. And actually, the common set of those three sets, it's EU reform. We really think that we need to reform the European Union, even if there is no enlargement, because we need to make our European Union better functioning in many ways. We spoke about unanimity versus other majorities, actually, and actually, I don't know, I think it's Yasu who spoke about different, well, no, it's Melchior who spoke of different ways. Huh? We can be a very good example. We have a lot of majority in Belgium, you know, we have the simple majority, the qualified majority, and we have the special majority in the federal parliament. It means that you need 2/3 for the constitution change, for example, you need 2/3 of the parliament, but also the majority in the two linguistic chapter or constituency of our federal parliament. We are full of ideas. I would have said good ideas. We are full of ideas. At least that's something. But one point that we didn't mention here, because it was not the purpose of this very good seminar. But I think that we have to work on that too. And you want in the think tanks is the changing world. It's the place of the European Union in this world. Obviously, we missed our place that we had during the Cold War and even a bit after, because the big fracture, the big challenge was between the US and the USSR and Russia. Now it is not anymore. It can sound a bit strange, but it is not anymore. It is still there, but the big challenge is between the US and China. So we are not the border anymore. I know it's a bit, I don't want to be provocative, it's too late for that, but it's there, the big challenge. So Europe has lost its competitive advantage of being the border in this challenge between, let's say, the two main powers in the world. And it's never nice, you know, to see you a little bit, let's say, lower in the ranking of the world, but it's not important. We are still very strong, we're still very rich, we are very numerous, so we have something to do. But we have to think our new place in this changing world. And for that, obviously, we need some reform. So we have those three sets, and this common set, that's the EU reform. The basic objective is to give all current and future EU citizens the sustained perspective that the Union furthers and protects their prosperity, freedoms, and security. That is what we call in Belgium now better and bigger. We spoke about it. You know, a few years ago we were still saying better and then bigger. Approfondissement avant élargissement. Now we change a little bit. It's better and bigger. We have to work in parallel. That means that, of course, to enlarge, we need to strike a better functioning. But even if we do not enlarge, and before we enlarge, we need to work better. The progress report we draft to nourish the roadmap explores a convergence of views across member states for a path towards internal reforms, as explained by Ambassador Arnolds. We hope that it will contribute to delivering on a better functioning EU, which is in the interest of us all, current and future members. This exclusive message has also the advantage of providing a convincing message that the reform process is in the interest of all citizens. And I'm a rather optimistic guy. I mean, by nature, but also by professional obligation. As a diplomat, we need to be optimistic. So it's true that it is difficult. It's a bumpy road. It has always been. It has been mentioned. Beginning of February, I was at the dinner of the European Council, and a lady at my table from Croatia said, I understand the new member states, we created the acquis, the funding members, and then it was like that, like that, like that, like that, and for you, it's like that. And it's kind of exponential, actually. It's not even addition, it's exponential, so it's very difficult. But it is, and it will be my last word, because I don't want to stand too much between you and your dinner, and even mine dinner, actually. It's that this is a very important process, but enlargement is a political process. So we sometimes should be clearer when we speak about it. The acquis and all, the chapters and all this very intensive and very important work, I won't say it's a technical work, because it's much more than a technical work, but it's a necessary work. But once again, in mathematics, I'm not a mathematician, I'm an historian. So, we know that there is les conditions nécessaires mais pas suffisantes, the necessary condition, but it is not sufficient. It is not enough, because it is a political process. So it may seem like we are adding something, but it's a two-way process. This political process also has to ease a little bit the technical process, because we want to enlarge. I mean, it's existential for the European Union to enlarge, not only because of the war, obviously also because of the war, but not only because of the war, because we need to extend also the basis, l'assiette of the European Union, if we want to count in this very, as we say, multipolar world where China has decided to be a strong power, not a soft power anymore, where the US has 10 years ago decided to, if not to go back totally to protectionism, of isolationism, but at least to withdraw a little bit of the world, where Africa has definitely entered the globalization, and they have a lot of things to offer. They like us, I can tell you, I've been serving a lot in Africa and being a lot there. They like us, we are the devil they know. But they have a lot to offer. And it's for the one who is going to take it and to pay the price. And we know the difficulties that they are facing. There is Latin America that you know better than us, but that's still far away. But maybe we should get closer. We should get closer to them. So it is really, we do not enlarge, and I say we, the 27 member states, not. We do not enlarge to be nice with the aspiring countries. No, it's because it is in our interest. With that, I would like to thank you once again for that. Thank you. Gracias por acogerme aquí en Madrid con sol y calor, una cosa que no tenemos en Bruselas desde meses. Entonces estoy anunciando al embajador que voy a ficar 2 semanas más aquí. ¿Ah? Es una cosa buena con el teleworking. It's good. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.